Okay, so this is SenseDoing meeting, our first on January 30th, 2022. Oh, let me see if I can figure out the transcripts.
Somehow like I requested it and it turned on. I don't know how that works, but
Okay, yeah,
that's a way to make it work.
it seems to be, yeah, I think anyone's allowed to do it. Cool. So I think most everyone knows each other on here. We don't probably need to do introductions, but if anyone wants to, we can.
I don't know John and he doesn't know me.
I don't know John either.
Well, I'll introduce myself then.
Yeah, I don't want to put you too much on the spot, John, but yeah, if you don't mind.
So I launched a platform called policykeys.com, and it's a way to ascribe a nonpartisan score to public policy solutions. We just got recognized by the OECD on their OPSI platform for a major potential and ability to scale. So Policy Keys is an open alpha at the moment. I think we have almost all the bugs squashed, but we're still maybe working on a bookmarking problem. So it's 16 games, 16 sets or games a week on one puzzle. And the puzzle is a solution to a problem. And we've got about 200 puzzles in the pipeline. They take a long time to prepare. And so I'm just interested in what everybody else is doing and if there's any synergy between what I'm doing and what you guys are doing.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe it'd probably be good to yeah, kind of, I don't know if anyone else wants to do an intro, or John, I think you've been at a few of these things, so you might know a few of us, but do you feel that I need to do anything, or you feel comfortable with or like finding out who we are? Are you comfortable with what
Well,
you've seen so
it'd be
far?
cool if we just did 30 seconds on what you're working on, just so we could start seeing if there's any where the pieces of the puzzle might fit together.
Yeah, so let me.
Yes, and I'd
Mhm.
also be interested in hearing maybe in the same 30 seconds, kind of maybe 45 seconds, relationship to SenseDoing and what we want, what each of us wants out of SenseDoing.
Yeah, and I think I'll just start with SenseDoing. My other projects will come into play later on. So let me say what I was thinking of SenseDoing, and then we can go around and anyone else who wants to talk. And I really actually kind of like the hands. I know some people don't, but raising your hand and here. So if you want to next kind of give a preface on SenseDoing and maybe correct anything. What I and so anyone's comfortable putting in 30 seconds or so about what you hope to get out of SenseDoing, like Pete said. For me, it's I'm interested in different processes for making for people to make better group decisions up to the size of society-wide group decisions. So SenseDoing was an opportunity. I've been working with several groups in theory land, so this is an opportunity to actually pick a topic and dive to it. So this will then be data used in our theories and in our applications, but to practice it more in a physical space, and then we can play with different practices, different systems. We can play together as a group on a specific topic. So I'm interested, and also and Pete brings this up well, is that there'll often be people will be coming in with an interest in a specific topic or a few topics, and then other people will be interested in kind of the meta process. So we want to be sensitive to different people's needs in this. So I don't have any. I do have some specific topics that I'm interested in, but mostly it's the meta thing of how do we make better decisions and where are the gaps in the process for new processes or tools, and to practice existing processes and tools rather than starting off from scratch. So Pete, how's that sound? Or what would you like to say?
Thanks, that's great, Bentley. So I'm interested in the idea of sense doing, and I'm kind of waiting to see how it coalesces and emerges. As Bentley said, one of my observations is that we've got at least a couple levels of participation. Are you interested in one particular instance of sense making and actioning? I guess the sense doing thing has come out of OGM and maybe some related communities where we, even when we do sense making, we don't actually take action on it. So I think just the name sense doing is an expression of desire to not only make sense about something, but then take actions that are, consonant with the sense made. So I think that's important. I don't have that. I am actually content working on seeing people making sense together, helping people make sense together. And then separately, I have a lot of passion around people getting stuff done together. I don't have a need to see those things directly connected, if that makes sense. So I care a lot that people are doing sense making collaboratively. I care a lot that people are doing project planning and project management and project coordination. Those things are both really important to me. That they get done in a pipeline, I don't care about. Somebody else should. I care that somebody else does, but I don't actually have that pipeline. So I'm interested in the meta process of sense making, and then I guess getting that ready to feed into project coordination, project management. For a while, I ran an experiment called Emergent Event Sense Making, got renamed to Sense Making for Emergent Events, SEE. This was kind of a reaction to seeing society coming to a acute need for sense making, like society-wide sense making, like it's February 2020, March 2020. What are we going to do about this thing called SARS-CoV-2? Or it's September 12th, 2001 or whatever it was. What just happened? Why did the World Trade Centers fall down? And what do we do about it? And how do we make a wise response to that? Which I think we pretty much failed on. We pretty much failed on COVID too. So how do in that there's a really fun thing for an informatician like me. It's a really fun thing to see all of a sudden a ton of information boiling around, bubbling and boiling, and then trying to make sense out of it because there's a lot of stuff to do. It's also really frustrating because there's lots of disinformation, there's lots of use of this information. So seeing emergent event sense making is a particular interest of mine, and seeing society doing a better job of those. And then, of course, most of you know I'm interested in how wikis might support all of that as well. So thanks, that was longer than 45 seconds, but I appreciate your time and attention.
Cool. What Pete said, plus maybe I'll illustrate my interest in SenseDoing with two different kind of entry paths. One of them is my really long-standing frustration that so many brilliant nuggets posts basically float by on things like private mailing lists and then disappear into the bit bucket, never to be found again. That these ought to be curated out somehow into the public view, and even better assembled into some sort of arrangement of ideas that make sense, that are useful for something, whatever the topic was that little shiny nugget was about. So that's a piece of it. And then separately, coming in from a very different sort of angle, a big question I've posed in front of some of our conversations is, how would a wise community handle something like a pandemic like COVID, as opposed to sense making or sense doing around what did we do right, what did we do wrong, and doing some basically after action review or critique or postmortem, sense doing for how do we lay down not instructions, but guidelines, the best wisdom we've derived, our best knowledge about how to go ahead and do these sorts of things. And not just about COVID, but about whatever, how would a wise community or a healthy community handle misinformation and actors who want to basically destroy trust within the community? How would, and name your question. And for me, sense doing is taking a bunch of conversations and ideas that are existing in the world already and turning them into some kind of asset, content, and I hate both those words, that is useful in general to us and to other people, that collects up either that visualizes an argument with the pros and cons and some result or decision, or that sets up things to do, checklists, and pattern languages and other sorts of things, all of which are forms of more crystallized knowledge or wisdom that might be useful for other people. So also a little longer than I wanted to talk, but Rob, you're up.
Yeah, I think what Jerry was just describing resonates strongly with me of thinking about different nuggets or statements or assertions, and either as a group or really even individually, what is it that I believe to be true based on research I may have done or someone that I trust telling me something, and helping myself stay consistent in my thoughts and across different topic areas, and then having tools to share those thoughts with other people that kind of conveys both the parent thought, but then maybe some of the supporting things. I do think we're all inundated with information, misinformation, truths, half-truths, research studies that may or may not be independent or might have been sponsored by a certain industry group. And so it's just building a better tool set of cataloging and triaging these bits of information floating by towards hopefully some broader conclusion.
I guess I'm up next. So I'm Hank, calling in from a small place near Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I'm probably the least techie person on the call, but well, one of the less techie people on the call. But I've been interested in sense making and collective intelligence for the last 20 or 30 years, and trying always in working with groups to find out how collective intelligence can work. So I'm a conceptual person. I like ideas, but I'm very interested in putting ideas into practice to see how they work and how they can be improved. And two of the things that I'm working on now, which I think probably can benefit from things we learn in this group. One of them are trying to understand how to create oracy labs, which are aimed at powerful ways of listening, understanding, expressing ideas, and by doing so, co-creating new knowledge in conversations. And I'm working with a group of 9 people, all of them except myself from the 5 Nordic countries in Europe, on a project about renewing Nordic democracy as an inspiration to other countries, finding out how democracy can better serve society in the 21st century. Like I said, the 5 Nordics are in the the core group, and we're looking at getting some of the Baltic countries involved as well. And I think that's a topic, renewing democracy for the 21st century, that can definitely benefit from some sense making, sense doing, and collective intelligence.
Oh, I thought your hand was up. Is your hand up, Pete? You're muted.
It was, I just dropped it. 2 words, pattern languages.
Okay, well, great. Yeah, I recognize that that I'd been de-emphasizing kind of taking action, but that is the initial one of the initial emphasis for SenseDoing, wasn't just finding solutions and doing that. Oh, and Stacy, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll introduce myself quickly because I'm interested in using a systems approach to move through value conflicts. And I use Facebook as sort of like my laboratory playground. And I had a really interesting interaction today where a very right-wing person in a political group made a comment about trolls and whatever. And I introduced myself to him. And we wound up getting to a point where we just talked about how these trolls were dividing us. And I asked him, what was nearest and dearest to his heart, at which point I found out it was sustainable agriculture. Now, I already knew that because I had vetted him. So at that point, I tagged him in a post where I had shared a talk that Klaus was going to be giving. And he was so excited because he said to him, soil was the most important thing. So those are the kind of things I like to do. And I'm really interested to know more about John's game because I could see myself playing. I don't imagine myself ever getting beyond being a front end user, but I'm interested in that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Pete, if you have something else.
Yeah, I also want to, I guess I want to remember that another impetus for this SenseDoing discussion was Marc-Antoine offering to curate together the OGM Google group using his tool. So that's a resource that we have to use Idealoom as one of our platforms, one of our experiments.
Yes, and to that point, one of the kind of proposals that I made earlier that I not in this meeting, but in earlier meetings that I don't know how useful it is us choosing a topic and then a practice and a tool, and maybe just one of those last two or two if they're complementary. And of course, we're not restricting anyone from using any other tools, but that would be something that we would experience together. And the thought was that we would kind of agree on a topic and a tool before we kind of started the meetings, and then the meetings would go through several meetings. I don't know if that process still sounds useful or overprescribed. Anyone have any feelings about that? If not, we could just give it a try.
Generally speaking, if you don't really focus it on a topic, it's just really conjecture. I mean, I think all these tools are better if you're having a question you're trying to answer, a problem you're trying to solve, a puzzle you're trying to solve. Otherwise, it's just talking about a solution.
Yeah.
It's better just to talk about the solution.
The main thing is the topic. The proposal is also we kind of set aside a practice that we will use to explore the topic. Is an additional piece, but the topic is the main thing, because that's the piece we're missing from all our theory. Pete?
Totally agree. Thanks, John. I'm interested. So now I'm going to say I'm interested in a meta thing. But I think it's critical. I want to understand what this group is and what it's doing. So I feel like the group needs a charter and a mission. before it makes sense to decide, what we're doing and how we're going to do it. Which maybe this is the right group of people to do that now. Maybe it's not. I kind of think it's probably not. But I think I think we have to do some more coalescing. We haven't done much coming up with a charter and then trying to attract people with that charter. Even though I love every one of you, it doesn't feel like a group to me yet, and I don't know what this group is doing, and I'm not tempted to join it yet because there's no there.
So let me delve into that a bit. When you say attract more people, are you thinking of a certain group size before you may find it valuable?
No, I am not. And actually, this is a good group size. I'm really happy with this group size, except that I think I'm not sure who's going to come back for the next call, for instance. I'm not sure that I would. It's not group size, it's necessary and sufficient kind of, or the right people, or whatever. So if it's definitely going to be about the practical different experiments on practical application of SenseDoing using a set of tools, that's one thing, and maybe I'm interested. If it's going to be diving in on soil health, I think that's super important, and I'm not going to participate except to help set up tools. Probably the same for each of us, and probably, and similarly, soil health is a good example. If it's going to be about soil health, I know that Klaus isn't here, and I would expect him to be part of that group. So good group size already, not cohesive, I don't think yet, and I guess the way I ask that, or your question is a good one. Who are the right people in the room? I feel like it's incumbent upon all of us, actually, even if we're not part of the group, to tell people, hey, do you know there's, hey, Klaus, do you know there's this group? Or, hey, Marc-Antoine, do you know that there's this group? And, can you be a part of it? Do you want to be a part of it?
So yeah, I hear all that. I think for each topic, we will want to reach out to people that we think would be interested in that topic. I don't know that those people are important as far as doing a charter. And also, I might want to clarify when you say charter. A charter could be a paragraph, right? You're not thinking about a large document, right?
Yep.
So kind of a combination of what we said for the people that kind of introduced and said what they wanted to get out of SenseDoing is really what I'm thinking. So that would suffice for what you're asking. Is that about right?
There's two parts of it. It's recursive, right? If we wrote down what I said and then said, hey, Pete, would you join this group? I would probably say yes, but I'm not sure that would apply to everybody else. So I think we need to sense do this. If we start drafting it together and start adding things that some people want, start shaving off some things that other people don't want, maybe we'll come to something where I can sign up or not, but we haven't gone through that, so.
Bentley, you're muted. Yeah, we haven't heard your last couple.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So to that point, some people, including me, have kind of created a few kind of like suggested documents. So we did some brainstorming on different things. I think most of this brainstorming section was like, here's a specific process we might want to use, as opposed to being meta about a group of people practicing processes on real topics. So I kind of put this one together, but this is completely, you know, just tossing something out there. And I think this kind of includes what Jerry and Pete and I and a couple other people said. So we could see if it's close enough that people would want to participate. And I don't really expect, everyone at the end of this call to decide. There's probably not a group charter that we'd have 100% participation from everyone here on. There's the Venn diagram, I don't think overlaps, but we'll see. So there's several ways we could go through this. I could just, well, let me up the font a little bit.
I think before we even start, one thing that occurs to me is I'm attracted to two different models. One of them is a long-standing working group, and Flotilla is an example of that. And the working group has a general focus, but not, in Flotilla's case, it doesn't even have specific experiments that we've planning to run. This one might have, here's part of the activity of this group is to regularly run experiments. A different way to do it is, instead of a long-standing group, charter each experiment separately. Out of the galaxy of the regulars, kind of, here's a small team, or here's a team of whoever wants to join that's going to run this particular experiment with this particular tool or process. Make sure that we write a report, and then we'll see who recharters for the next one. That's a little bit the model of the Dawn of Everything book club, right? Dawn of Everything book club was specifically scoped to just running the experiment of let's read Dawn of Everything, and then in discussion, maybe we'll do it again for a different book. Maybe we'll change up the way that we do it, but it's time bound. It's not reading books forever. It's reading this one book. So I like both of those models for different reasons.
Jerry, if you want to.
Yeah, thanks. The last time we had a SenseDoing steering conversation, we ended up talking a bunch about picking a topic, and found that picking a topic was a thorny question, not an insurmountable question, just a question that matters a lot in terms of who's going to show up, what we think is going to happen, all those kinds of things. I'm seeing sort of that SenseDoing is a little bit like the hoedown that we had a long time ago in OGM, where we invite people who love different tools and are skilled at different tools to come in and tackle whatever topic it is we choose to do. And then I think we need to push further than I was pushing during the hoedown call, which is not just, hey, show us what you did, but rather, let's slow this thing down and actually make visible sense out of the topic at hand, and create some kind of artifact. Could be a set of wiki pages in a pattern language, could be something else, but create some durable, interesting, useful artifact, not necessarily finished artifact, out of the SenseDoing exercise. That feels like an important thing to do. And that may just be a description of what SenseDoing looks like to me. And so I'm curious, and I don't know if we want to spend the time doing this, but from whoever has an opinion about this, what would a successful SenseDoing exercise, not project, just exercise, look like to several of us? I think that might be an interesting thing to ask, because then with some measure of what does success smell like, we could work our way back toward a charter of the kind that Pete's describing.
Go ahead, John.
So, so I'm hearing three things. It's process, topic and tools. Let's just leave it at that. So I'm intrigued. Jonathan Haidt has the model, the elephant, the rider, and the path. So the path, for an example, we could take Hank's project. So the path would be, okay, here's people who want to do something about democracy, boots on the ground for real. The elephant is getting all of the people who can help to walk down the path together, because elephants have a propensity to wander off into the woods. And the rider is, trying to put some kind of executive function on it, like rules and all that stuff. So I forget the guy who came up with forming, storming, norming, and performing. Forming, storming, norming, and performing. I think that's the right sequence.
It's Tuckman. His
Tuckman,
stages of
thank
group
you.
development, Bruce Tuckman.
Yeah, thank you. So the forming is, we all showed up today. So, okay, that's a start. And the storming is trying to figure out like something to start on. First step, just a first step. The elephant has to take one step, not all the steps, just one. And then we will find out what we need and what we don't need, because we're walking down that path trying to help Hank. I still vote for a concrete. One more thing. When I was building policy keys, it's mostly sentiment and direction. It's not in the weeds, right? It's not the sausage making of every law and every footnote and 27 pages for, or 500 pages for that matter. It's a sentiment and a direction and a simple process. We might be able to really help Hank. We all have a bunch of really cool tools. So anyway, I'm done.
If you had something, do you want to?
Yeah, I've got something else. Thanks, John. So along with that charter, another thing obviously that we will need, or that a group needs to be successful, is one or several people committed to running it. And that can be kind of a light lift, or it can be a heavier lift. But Dawn of Everything Book Club happened because I made sure it happened, not because the group of people that were there would have continued without me. Not trying to take credit or anything like that. All the credit goes to the group for being there, but somebody would have to say, I volunteer to be the person to make sure that meetings get run, and that, times get changed if they need to, and that, everybody is made aware of the meetings. And, I'm going to, I guess a big part of it is taking responsibility for making sure decisions get made. You don't have to be the one making the decisions, but sometimes there's decisions that need to get made. Are we going to take notes? What's the process for taking turns during a call? How do we make sure that we get the output that we promised to get ourselves? If we're going to write up a report, are there going to be people who make sure that the report gets written? Are there people who actually do the writing of the report? Yeah, so on and so forth. So not to put anybody on the spot, and I'm not going to volunteer, I think, but it's not a group unless somebody's said I'm going to take responsibility to make sure that it's a group, and here's the amount of effort that I can put in, and the work product that we can expect to get out of it, and I'll be responsible to make sure that that happens.
Yeah. So, and just kind of a process thing. I think it's also helpful if we leave our hands up until we're done talking, just so the image doesn't move around when we keep track of who's talking. So I think everything that everyone has brought up in the last few minutes, I think is in this proposal in one fashion or another. So maybe it'd be helpful to kind of go through this and modify it. So for example, like Pete's question about, is there a group that has a you know, an ongoing working group, and then or a you know, time bound events. The way I was envisioning it is that there would be a there would be a working group, and like Pete said, that they would need to have some people that are willing to put in some time. If this is beneficial to my other work, then I'm willing to put in some time. Jerry said he would be able to put in all the time. I think with 2 people, we can sustain the momentum if there's participation. If anyone else is willing, feel free to raise your hand at any time. I don't expect it to be a lot of time. Of course, that'll depend on what we decide together to be a process. The way I kind of thought is that this kind of meta group, whoever wants to participate in them, would kind of work with the community to you know, build a combination of a topic, a process, and a tool, and then we'd have a list of those, and then there would be a way to time to either talk about that or to vote on that, or to, you know, we've got to figure out a more meta process on how we do that. Probably just a quick vote of who's interested in which kind of topic, process, tool combinations. And then I lost my spot. I don't know what just happened. Anyways, so then we choose a topic, and then that would be a you know, I wouldn't say it's specifically time-bound event, but it wouldn't be unlimited like a working group. Like, we don't know exactly how many meetings, but it would be probably a handful of meetings. So we'd have time to look at the information. Then you'd have a, you know, we would then kind of go through whatever process was proposed to be used for that topic. And then, yeah, there would be a way to switch topics. Yeah, and then, you know, the idea that I was just throwing out there, and there could be lots of ways to do this, is that we have that running list of topics, and you know, each week before the meeting, it's kind of like decide, okay, do we want to continue on this topic, or does the majority of the group want to go to another topic? And if we go to the other one, then we'd summarize our lesson learned and post any artifacts that we've created. But we could also time box it with, you know, a specific, you know, a 5 meeting thing that would people would know what's going up. So there's lots of ways to do that, but yeah, that there would be kind of the meta group kind of initiating these, but each topic would be its own kind of project, time box project. Was an idea. Yeah, so maybe just want to hear if anyone has any opinions or adaptations of that as being the loose process to start with, and we'll solidify it as we go.
Small side thing that could be interesting. Paul Roney and I are reshaping and rethinking the podcast that I was doing for BetaWorks. It's going to be called HyperTalk. And the notion is that we're going to be really flex about who is hosting, who is interviewing, who is doing what, and try to emphasize short series. So 4-6 episodes that some host wants to propose and then run. And so what you just described, Bentley, would make a really lovely short series under the umbrella of HyperTalk. And so SenseDoing could be a theme, we could pick a topic, we could then do 4 episodes and then post them through to the podcast, which Paul and I will worry about producing, and then lather, rinse, repeat, if anybody's interested in that.
Go ahead, Pete.
As stated, reading through the document, I don't see the doing part of SenseDoing.
Well,
Which
I mean, that's true. But that is because each time we go to do the SenseDoing, like this is just initiating the SenseDoing process. The doing would be, what we're doing would be decided on each topic. Like it's I don't want to pigeonhole it in
okay.
to a certain process at this point. So it's just the meta process of generating experiments. And then each
So,
experiment would have its own process.
and
maybe.
that experiment might have actually accomplishing something in the real world as an output, or it might not. So
Yes, I think in general, we would want to have one of the goals of each of the experiments to have an actual, at least artifacts, but maybe also concrete action. I think that would be a common theme among them all, so we could make that explicit. I do have kind of in the hopeful results, so maybe we should say each of these, taking collective actions to improve the world around the chosen topic. So we could probably make that clearer in this document.
and there's also the in the this is this is not section. This is not a place to solve a particular topic or take consistent action to alleviate a specific issue.
This is not. Sorry, say that again.
Well, I just read what it said.
Oh,
So maybe this needs to have some wordsmithing or changes or whatever.
well, yeah. That needs some wordsmithing probably. So it's not a
I get the
not a
gist of it.
continuous. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not the whole experiment is not the whole process is not about
Yeah.
any single topic. Yeah. So that would need work.
Cool. Thanks. That's
And of
me.
course, if someone has a different proposal, this is not mandatory.
And for what it's worth, I bring up SenseDoing partly because that was there's an unresolved need for OGM to get more stuff done. So I like having one of the stated goals. I think I think sharpening up one of the goals should be there's always an artifact out of our experiments. We always write up a report or something like that. So I would sharpen that to the point where it doesn't say hopeful results. It's like every experiment is going to have a write-up. However, I also want to make I don't think so. I guess I'm trying to represent on behalf of the OGM collective folks that feel like we're not getting enough done. I have some of that, and I don't need all of it necessarily. So maybe SenseDoing isn't, maybe SenseDoing is kind of one of the names that we got started under, but it's not actually. And at the title of this, there isn't a doing thing. It's collaborative sense making. So I guess mostly I'm just want to make sure that we're clear on it, and that we honor the kind of the wishes of OGM, even if we decide not to, not to do that. I think that would be okay too. Thanks.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah. So I'm going to propose along the lines of this is not kind of there. Maybe sense doing is a place to define and improve the practice of sense doing through short bursts of activity on various topics, specific topics, because that's how you know that you're sense doing or not. But that if you wanted then to continue, and the way I'm envisioning it is that what we learn about sense doing then goes and feeds Klaus and everybody working on food and soil health and water health. And then goes and feeds everybody worried about COVID and pandemics and pandemic response. And that this becomes what we develop in sense doing is in fact the methods and routines and practices of an OGME group that is tackling some sphere of interest, if that makes sense. And that maybe as part of that, we wind up with some interesting ways of evaluating tools, figuring out how to bridge or connect tools and work, figuring out which kinds of work product are preferable over others. I don't know, I'm making this up as I'm sort of thinking out loud. And then I have no trouble with sense doing as a name, so I don't know if you want to, this document is titled Collaborative Sense Making Lab, and you have a section about potential names, including a CDL conflict name. I'm happy just sort of going with sense doing for this as a project name, unless this document you're showing us had a larger purpose, Bentley.
Yeah, just on that. No, it's just I've had people come in with very different expectations when they hear sense doing. So that's why I was exploring other names, but I'm not.
The only conflict with sense doing I've heard is Bobby Fishkin's group in San Francisco has sort of a sense doing thing, a
No,
kind of activity, but that's
I'm
very
just
different.
saying when people come in, they're
Yep.
more like, oh, this is the place where OGM takes action on long-term goals. And
Oh,
I'm like,
gotcha.
no, that's not what that, yes, I see. And that is actually, that may have been the original definition of sense doing. So I can understand why they get confused. So it is this kind of clarification, but I don't think
Yeah.
it's a big enough issue to really worry about. I think if we get through a few, the name will become clearer. So
Yeah.
I mean, we can name this back to sense doing.
And it feels to me like sense doing is a way of upping the game of all of our other sense making activities. That if sense doing does its job right, then we will stop needing to worry about, hey, we're just doing a lot of blabbing and not a lot of doing, because we will be doing more as we see fit, or as individuals in each conversation take initiative and go use some of these methods and tools.
Yeah.
Hank?
Yeah, I like the conversation so far. I agree with almost everything that was said, and I think most people, at least the people who are talking, seem to be on the same line. Just for reference, I was one of the members of that Dawn of Everything group that Pete was shepherding. And I made an effort to come every time. And when I couldn't come, I was very unhappy. And I did read the extensive notes that were taken. But I totally agree with what you were saying, Pete, that if we want to make something happen, there have to be a couple of people who take responsibility. So if it's going to be Pete and Jerry doing some things, the person whose topic is being explored has to take a real lot of responsibility as well. I'm also very much in favor of prototyping, and I think as soon as we agree with everything, enough to make a start, not everything being perfectly worked out, we should do a session and see what we learn from spending 90 minutes in a session on someone's topic. And I'm not sure if this should be a meta group, or, as was said right in the beginning of the conversation, who are the right people to have here. There should be some thoughts and possibly some massage work done on other people who we all feel are important to have in a sort of meta group. But obviously, if a topic is in the real world, and John gave the example of my topic, and I don't know if that's a good one to use or not, but in that example, I'd have to have people who were very passionate about working on that with us in the group as well.
Right. Yeah, so I guess what I'm hearing is that this this kind of proposal is not too far from something people would be willing to participate in. Someone please correct me if it's not. So I kind of see it as a matter of kind of workshopping this and updating it as we go. So maybe so anyone's feel free to suggest changes and to put in comments of areas that are confusing, and then maybe Jerry and I can just kind of get our heads together and clean it up a bit, and then I think maybe for the next 5 minutes for this meeting, we could also choose to make the meetings longer. I think the normal OGM calls are an hour and a half. But I wanted to also find out just whether anyone objected to our first topic, the proposal that we have discussed in the past, and there was a lot of emphasis around was kind of what Jerry said about, what would a healthy society do during a pandemic. And we even talked about narrowing it even more to just be regarding masks, because that's a rather large topic. So if no one has any strong objections, that'd probably be the first topic. Yeah, and then I guess we need to kind of figure out for the next meeting to I guess what would be good as homework is to let's see if anyone has any specific practices we want to apply to that, a specific tool. We don't have to have both, but probably at least one or the other to start with, and then we can I feel comfortable leaving it that loose. I don't know if anyone else wants to have a more structured process. I know Pete would probably prefer it that way. Go ahead, Pete.
I like what you're saying, Bentley, and the thing I wanted to say to sharpen what I think one of the things Hank said is not only do we need like you and Jerry to say, hey, we're actually going to organize this thing and make sure it happens. Then we also need, if it's a thing where specific experiments are getting set up, I think you guys don't want to be the people making sure that the experiment happens as well, or at least you don't want to be the only one. So soil health is a good example. COVID may be a good example too, but soil health is maybe a little bit removed from each. We all know that there are other people who are experts at soil health, and so having Bentley or Jerry being, I'm going to make sure we do a great job of sense making soil health. You guys would probably say, and we have, XYZ helping us to make sure that we get through that. And maybe that's also the person or the group that gets benefited by that work. So I think you explicitly want to say part of it is we're not going to run an experiment unless we've got some subject matter experts and additional help on the subject matter work and knowledge and artifacts that we want to start with and end with and things like that. And thanks, Hank, for kind of pointing that out.
there's a couple of hands up, but maybe I can interject real quick and just say I think there's also value in working on processes where you don't have experts available. So I don't know if I'd want to make that a requirement, but I think we need to list it.
Agree, but I think, and maybe I misspoke a little bit. Experts are maybe useful. You're totally right. It would be awesome to run something on COVID or something on soil health even, or CO2 management or whatever. Part of sense making and sense doing especially is doing it well, even if you're not a subject matter expert. I think I want to make clear though that there's kind of two levels of work that needs to get done. One is just making sure that the group has a heartbeat and meets every, at regular intervals, and decisions get made and to-dos get done and things like that. So if you and Jerry are signed up for that, that in itself is a fair amount of work. There's additional work in running an experiment. And I think you too should be cognizant of the extra effort needed, and probably assign a experiment director, or at least an experiment assistant or something like that, and it could actually, it would be perfect to do it with somebody who's enthusiastic but not an expert. That would be perfect. But here's somebody who's going to say, I'm going to make sure this experiment gets run well, as well as the machinery of the group. And it's an extra lift. And I think, Bentley, you and Jerry probably don't want to take that on, usually, maybe ever. And you should be explicit about needing to make sure that role gets filled.
Thank you. John?
I just wanted to talk about the first topic. So in coaching theory, you want to have the first one be a quick win, something that isn't going to be so hard that everybody gets lost in the shuffle. The other thing is we tried to do masks and policy keys, and we aborted the mission. The reason is that we feel that currently it's intractable, in that the people who don't want to wear masks are not going to be convinced to wear masks, no matter what we say and how we say it. We did have a different take on COVID that we are interested in doing, and I would be interested in doing this with this group. There are people who never get COVID or hardly ever get COVID. They got COVID and it was like the common cold. And why is that? That's really interesting, because maybe there's something in there that could scale. The other reason that we haven't done that yet, though, is that there appears to be so much science going on about the coronavirus and with mRNA and banana protein and all that, that it wouldn't be that far-fetched that science actually has this under control in 24 months. And so I'm not sure that, for limited amounts of time to spend something that may be eclipsed by science, it's kind of like a tough road to hoe. I'm done.
Michael, go ahead.
Hi all, haven't spoken up till now. One thing I'm wondering is, and as John said, thinking about the easy win for a first try, I wonder about anything COVID related and masks specifically, because they're so heavily dealt with. There's so much to sift through to make sense of from every point of view, that I'm sure a consensus a group could come to by like vetting everything that had ever been written, which would take a long time, would be some kind of slushy middle ground, like, you know, masks may have been over required in some situations, but they certainly do some good, you know. And what I'm wondering is, it seems to me that like sense doing requires sense making to allow for the possibility that people differ on what the doing should be and have different priorities, which can be the thing that leaps to mind for me is like, if you said to somebody, here's the problem, we need to get from point A to point B, what's the best route? There would be people who would want to take the most enjoyable route. There'd be people who wanted to take the most energy efficient route. There'd be people who wanted to take the route that had the best places to stop for food. And figuring out the sense-making apparatus for taking all the granules of information and having a way to filter by, you know, the people who prioritize food would suggest this route, the people who prioritize speed would prioritize this route, but with that end in mind and the ability to sense make based on the expertise of the people who are individually vetting different aspects, not even necessarily for the reason of how do you get from point A to point B, but just local people saying these are the good places to eat, you know, that you want to come up with mechanisms for assimilating, for, you know, cross-referencing all that information. So I wonder if we shouldn't take a really, really simple problem and see about how you take a limited amount of information and, you know, gauge each thing's usefulness based on the expertise that can be brought to bear on it by different people. Like the same thing might be thumbs up from the foodie and thumbs down from the you know, the person who's going for speed. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out into the group.
So I do think smaller is better. I think you can get too small. I don't think, as far as deciding on the topic, the rubric of people being able to be convinced is that important. I think the important thing is that we can make sense of the situation and identify that people are not easily or potentially convinced at all. But those are the topics that I specifically want to tackle. Although we can pick a smaller, you know, a smaller topic. I think defining a win will have to be very narrow, also, so that it could be successful even if the topic ends up being too large. Like, you know, we want to, you know, map out, come out with an artifact that just reduces people's polarity in the situation a little bit, or some sort of goal like that, that doesn't solve the problem, but maybe gives us, you know, and the action could just be, hey, we're going to share this on social media, and it's mapped out in such a way that it doesn't increase the polarity of the situation, but it maybe reduces it by 0.001%. So those are my intuitions. I'm comfortable that masking during a pandemic is too large of a topic, and I'm okay with that. I don't want to spend too much. I don't think spending a lot of time going through a list of topics and finding the right size one would be a great use of time. I kind of want to get in there, find out it's too big, and then we as a group can go smaller. But just because I think anything we pick is going to be too big from my experience of doing this. So those are my feelings. So I'm open to changing the topic, but we also, if you don't suggest like this topic, let's be sure to suggest something else, because just an absence of another proposal, it's pointing out flaws is not generative.
So I kind of like masking as a narrowing, and certainly I agree with what Bentley just said about it's probably too big still for us. But I'm really interested in the dynamics between the science versus and things like the social dynamics, because I think that, John, what you said about like masking was intractable is a statement of observable reality today in the political realm and what's happened. I completely agree with that.
Descriptive, not prescriptive, right?
Yeah, but
Right.
a piece of what I'm hoping SenseDoing can do is pop up above and look at the system. And the reason that I was heading toward, hey, what would a healthy community do about these issues, is that gives you a frame to look back and say, a healthy community wouldn't have allowed the CDC to say, hey, everybody, we don't think you should go get masks secretly behind the curtain because there's going to be a run on masks and our emergency workers won't have any, but instead fucking up their credibility. And instead tackling the social dynamics of trust and credibility right up front and saying, here are things around every sharing of facts, and we're going to focus on masking, about how scientific research might have been done differently, how advice collecting and making and giving might have been done differently, and all those kinds of things from our amateur perspective, because none of us are policymakers, none of us have worked at the CDC, none of us are doctors, none of us are epidemiologists, et cetera, but we're all intensely curious and can have access to experts in the case we actually would like to present some of these questions. And maybe a piece of the SenseDoing winds up with a couple of very lovely, juicy questions that we then pose to some outside expert for some opinions, and that becomes a second phase or a fourth phase of what SenseDoing is like. But I really like the idea of, and I think this opened my eyes when Grace came into one of our conversations in one of the OGM calls and said, well, before the pandemic, did you trust big pharma? And I consult my inner sense, and I'm like, well, fuck no. And I can point you toward many reasons that are very worthwhile for not trusting big pharma. And then she's like, did you trust the government? I'm like, no, and in particular, if you were Black American, you probably would trust them less than me because of syphilis studies during World War II and a bunch of other stupid things. And then she's like, and so why would you jump in wholesale to trust them? And I'm like, well, because the logic of, and then I'm like, oh, okay, that territory to me is really juicy to explore, and better paths toward building not a consensus, meaning 100% agreement on anything, because I think that's completely impossible here, but better paths toward better behavior among more people, to me is really, really interesting. And I think we could, in fact, maybe describe that, or if we focused on it for enough time, we couldn't solve it, but we could describe it in ways that are more useful than what I've seen before. And that doesn't mean solving the science of it down to the last little bit, but it does mean pursuing the science enough that we can be clear about what we think was happening and where we think it went, and what some of the rough preliminary results seem to be, and maybe even scrolling over time, like, hey, up front, nobody in particular knew if it was fomites, or it was bodily fluids, or it was aerosols, or it was droplets. And those were some of the major concerns about masking and other forms of prevention. Okay, cool. That becomes your original experimentation, and maybe you create some way of crowdsourcing experimentation around those particular things. And the oversharing of data in a patients like me kind of setting, or I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here, but I'm extremely interested in what of those many different options would have led to better consensus in the gentle sense of many people agreeing to do something together toward solutions that would have been more high functioning and offered better results over time than what it is we and other countries did do. And then I'm also very, very interested in the cultural aspects of this, in the sense of masking in Japan has no stigma. Before pandemic, there were plenty of people who regularly wore masks on the subway to commute because, hey, it's what we do. And so masking as a general thing was much easier in Japan than here, where it was easily stigmatized. And then I'm also interested in the stigmatization, the intentional undermining of facts and stigmatization, and how to undermine the undermining of facts, how to basically make things so trustworthy and explicit that the undermining of facts was made more difficult, if not, it's not impossible, because any idiot can go out there and lie like a rug, and they do, and anything someone says 3 times is true per the Bellman's fallacy. But hey, are there ways to actually behave so transparently in public that that act of undermining trust is weakened or not credible, or not nearly as credible as the trustworthy agents? Sorry to go on, but to me, I'm not, I'm interested in the science and what it says, but I think that that pales in comparison to all these other juicy issues that are right next door, that are all about whether behavior, whether compliance happens or cooperation happens or anything like that. And then this whole thing about mandates versus suggestions, that plays in here as well. And sorry, before Pete jumps in, I wanted to add one thing, which was, Michael, the thing you were saying about different groups might have different opinions maps nicely to a piece of what John's public keys, policy keys site actually does. You can sort of pick a group in the exercise in some way that John can describe better than I can.
Well, it's a model of society with 128 roles, and everyone identifies with some number of those roles, and it can give you kind of it can lay out sense. It can make sense out of what you might think about a solution based on what those roles would think and why. So it's a role-playing game. So if there's an aha moment from that, it's that almost everyone has to be conflicted about public policy solutions because of all the different roles that you play in society. And it's a way to cut through the hubris of the two parties just telling us what to say and think because it suits them. So policy keys is a model of society that's way better than the two-party system or Congress or the Supreme Court or the media. Because if you go by public policy, you go by public opinion, none of those are over 50% approval rating. But the solutions on the leaderboard are in the 70s. Some are in the 80s, some are in the 60s. So it's a better model of society. What I like, Bentley, I was looking at your tool, and correct me if I'm wrong, but because I haven't looked at it in a while, but it strikes me that you're doing like a divergent process to map what I call yeses and nos or pros and cons, and then to kind of do a Condorcet voting on it to get a Bayesian sort for what's up with this. And there it is. It's the yeses and nos in some kind of a priority order based on the participants in the room. Is that kind of what your tool does?
It is in a similar vein, but there is no voting. And
Well, isn't there like
and it doesn't use Bayesian or Condorcet or any of the current plans. It's a novel way of doing it. But I also don't want to get into too much detail. I think, John, I would love to have a time where we talk about comparing and contrasting our tools.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, I'd like that.
Yeah. And we could invite everyone. Maybe we post that in the SenseDoing. So we'll find some time offline. Pete?
I don't know how to spell Condorcet. But that's not my.
Is that your question?
It's not.
CONDOCET.
Gotcha.
I think I forgot the R.
Yeah, gotcha. I was modeling the wrong language, I think, Italian rather than French.
French. Yeah, French.
I so really quickly though, while we're thinking about whether or not the topic should be masking in a pandemic, I resonate with what I resonate both with what John says. John says, by the way, in coaching practice, usually you pick an easy win up front. And having been a lay semi-subject matter expert on COVID, publishing a newsletter and talking to people about what that newsletter includes and things like that. It's a tricky subject. But I also resonate with what Bentley says. They're all going to be tricky subjects. Let's just pick one and go, and it's fine. It's not like we're needing to solve this thing. We just need to get on the mat and exercise with it. And if we get beat up, then that's a great exercise. So I like both those things. Right into that, as soon as we say, I can't quite articulate what I'm hanging up on a bit, but I think what I want is, it seems like there should be some reading or homework. The problem of coming together to talk about what we're talking about is kind of an understood problem. So so to get to there, what I need to say is just the word mask is fraught. And so I put the link to SIDRAP, SIDRAP blog post about masking and mask studies and why do mask studies mostly fail and stuff like that. They use face piece, actually, is the first word that you hit on. And this comes up for me because yesterday I put out one of my, irregular updates to Pete's COVID News. And I was talking about masking and the importance of it, and I got a reply back from a smart person going, yeah, I don't think masking is that important because I can tell that it's not very effective. Whenever I'm breathing in and out, there's this airflow all over my face, like going in and going out. And I'm like, oh my God, it is 2023, and the person I'm talking to and saying you should mask is wearing a cloth mask or maybe a surgical mask. And those in my circle, those aren't even considered masks anymore. It's like, I don't know why you're bothering with a surgical mask when it's ineffective, and it's known to be ineffective. And we've talked about the lack of efficiency of a surgical mask for like, oh my God, like 2.5 years or something like that, right? So it's like, whoa. And then of course I go back to, I flip back to reality or something and looking at it from that person's point of view. Yeah, of course, we talk about masking all the time. Society talks about masking. Usually they mean a cloth mask or maybe a surgical mask nowadays. You're right. And the thing that I think of as a mask is actually called a respirator. It's not called a mask, even though all of my tribe calls it a mask now. So then the thing that got me to, it's like, as we're setting up each of these experiments, now I'll flip out of like subject matter back into process a little bit. As we're setting up these experiments, we have to have at least one meeting, maybe two, talking about the ground rules of what we're even talking about, because the presenting question that we've got, what would a healthy society do? When would a healthy society prescribe masks? Is a woefully incomplete statement because of that word masks, It's like, let's talk about what masks mean. And in the front part of that blog post, they've got, okay, here's respirators and surgical masks and cloth masks, and here's a picture of each one. And here's, and the thing I'm actually looking for, I didn't find it on a quick search, is, there's a great study from 2020, I think, of, here's cloth mask is worth about a minute's worth of, it'll keep you safe for a minute, and a surgical mask will keep you safe for 5 or 10 minutes. A respirator will keep you safe for 24 hours. It's like, they're not the same thing, even though we call them the same thing. And even though we have different, intersectioning and convergent and divergent meanings for that simple word. So so it seems like just to get to the point where we can run the experiment, we have to do sense making on what we're talking about running the experiment as. And it seems like that should be kind of I feel like there's a reading list for that, or a process map. Here's how you do enough sense making at the beginning of the day, so that the rest of the day you're talking about what you really wanted to talk about, and not the meaning, not the semantics of particular words or whatever.
Michael, do you mind if I slip in before you go? I also have to get I have to get ready for a face-to-face meeting, so I have to drop off in a sec after I say this. Pete, I'm unclear that what you just said, which I love and agree with, is a precondition to the ground rules of how this conversation goes. I think it's one of the branches of logic of sense doing for this issue, and it's fabulous. Just like I said, hey, the social dynamics and the mistrust and the whatever, that's a branch. This is a branch, like nomenclature, technology behind the nomenclature, objections to the nomenclature, and naive experiences with simple non-functional masks, and how that information got out. That is a juicy branch for the work we would do together, sense doing around masks, even if we just called it masks, which I think is like a good magnet.
The wiki pattern that came to mind was shared language. And from wikis, I know that shared language is an important part of a project. And until you achieve shared language, the project participants are, they're just going to trip over themselves. So I thank you, Jerry. I think you're right. It's one of the branches that we explore, but it seems like, and then jumping from, I don't mean just shared language, but jumping off from shared language, it seems like you want, maybe what I feel like is it's a recursive process, right? Sense doing is a recursive process. And it seems like you want to do 1 or 2 rounds at the very beginning before you even start, kind of, in order to at least know that you're on the same field. If maybe you're not even playing the same game yet, at least we can stick together long enough to do a few more rounds after that without blowing apart. It's kind of what I'm thinking.
Thanks. I'm going to drop off right now.
Au revoir.
And maybe we can close up soon, but Michael.
I just wanted to I think if we're addressing the challenge of sense doing, which implies decision making, and sense making. I mean, the sense doing, sense making semantic question for me seems like it might be better addressed by separating, like having a sense, having a picture of sense doing being something larger than sense making, that where sense making is necessary, then decision making is necessary, then action taking is necessary, and that's sense doing as opposed to just sense making. I may be wrong about that, but it's sort of something I have in my head. And coming back to the example of the point A to point B, I don't mean that necessarily just with regard to travel. If we tackled something like, how do I build a house, or how do I make, a particular dish, the question of how do I determine what are the credible sources, what are the different priorities I could have, what are the what's vetted, what's not vetted, how do I share that information with other people who I'm collaborating on this sense doing process. Is this a solo act, or am I doing it with 4 other people who also have to be in agreement? That just seems like enough of a challenge in itself that the issue we tackle might, and the issues we tackle in general to kind of test this method might want to be as flat as possible, and as, you know, like, I mean, I can't think of anything, you know, even how do I make a particular dish will be subject to argument, or you know, differing reviews of the same input, or the importance of using a fresh ingredient versus a packaged ingredient. Or, you know, if I'm building a house, am I building it in this locale under these regulations, or in that locale under those regulations? Anyway, I'm really up for us learning from the process a little bit by tackling something where the information is easily accessible, and the vetting of what might be, you know, commercial information that's trying to sell you something, you know, can be more evident. So yeah.
Well, great. I don't want this meeting to go on too long. We don't have any other hands raised. So what I'd like to suggest is that people, if after this discussion you still want to propose other topics / processes / tools, or a topic without a process or a tool, if we could just throw them in the SenseDoing Mattermost channel. If anyone's not accessing that, let me know. You can also go on this topic and add it to the topics scratch pad. You just might want to say that this is a proposal, and then either before the next meeting or during the next meeting, we'll you know, if there's a lot of disagreement on the topic, we could just do a vote and see what happens. Is an hour and a half sound good? And is this time still good for everyone who made it? Of course, the people whose time that was bad didn't make it. So I think I'll just put, if people were interested, then maybe, I don't know, maybe it'd be good to get a feeling from people who wants to maybe not continue, but is willing to do one other meeting. Is most everyone here willing to? I'm seeing a couple nods. I don't know, Pete, if you want to make a commitment.
Yeah, I would
Oh,
come
yeah.
to another meeting or two.
Okay.
I'd also be interested in doing some outreach, and I can help a little bit.
Right.
And Bentley, maybe you and I can collaborate on I can start it maybe even on a kind of an update for Plex comes out this week.
Yeah, that sounds
then,
perfect.
That Plex post, I think a thing that I didn't do last time, and I think you didn't do, we should have taken the Plex post and put it out specifically on the list, and maybe on Mastodon or wherever.
Yeah. I think we could do a little bit more cross posting to make that a little bit more visible.
Yeah.
Well,
And
thanks
Pete,
everyone.
Wait.
Go ahead.
Did you see Pete, did you see John's thing in the chat about having trouble with Mattermost?
I did not, no.
Yeah, I don't know. I got in once and now I just can't get in, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but
Hey, John, if you
I'll
want,
send
if
you
you go,
email.
yeah, that, or if you also want to, if you go to bentleydavis.com, and in the upper right hand corner, there's schedule a time, you can get on my calendar and we can hit that and maybe talk systems as well.
And I also wanted to make sure that we could get an answer back to Rob. Rob said, give me a ballpark for what I'm committing to. So I think his example was, you know, are we talking about 4 hours or four meetings, 1.5 hours each, or something like that?
Was that in the Mattermost, or was that in the chat here?
It's in this chat.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
getting an answer back to him, hailing him on Mattermost, I think would be great.
I mean, I wanted to feel that people can come and go, but maybe I'm too.
He's got a specific question, you know. He's not going to come an hour and a half forever, But if we can time box it for him, then he can, you know, make the decision to allocate a certain amount of time. Here's what we're doing. Here's how long we think it's going to take. And I think we have enough information to say, you know, so actually, Bentley, your question was, can we commit to another hour and a half and keep and see where we get to after that?
Yeah, I just hate putting a limit of 5 meetings and stuff. It's kind of like, you know, if you get bored, don't come to the next one. But I'm being probably too, you know,
Well,
It's
Bentley, I
the
stay
other
while
think,
you
way
hang out.
around. He's certainly not going to come if we don't have a goal in mind and, you know, an accomplishment in mind. But if we say, you know, hey, you know, in this small number of meetings, we'll get to this place, he would be able to make it probably.
Yeah, so I guess I'm thinking if anyone wants a concrete goal within a specific period of time, I don't think this is the project for them, is what I'm kind of saying.
Maybe a different way to say it.
Yeah.
And is publishing a kind of a roadmap. Here's where we're going. And this could be actually an update, a part of the update on Plex. The group has decided to get together for another meeting, and we're expecting, you know, a typical experiment thing will be, you know, somewhere between 3 and 6 meetings and whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
what could be just open space meeting technology, just, you know, here's the topic this month, here's the topic next month. We're using the same general format. If you want this topic, show up. If you don't show up. But so, I mean, I'm a Vistage chair, and not that happens a lot in Vistage, but you know, if the speaker 1 month is not of any interest, then some people skip the meeting. You know, but if okay, so you know, there's some ability to float in and out and still be part of the community.
Thanks, John.
Let's chat more and thanks, John. Let's chat more in the SenseDoing channel. I gotta drop off. Thanks, everyone.
Great
Yeah,
meeting. Good job,
good
Bentley. Thank you.
conversation. See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.